Welcome to the Carl B. Phillips Show, hosted by gospel music industry veteran, recording artist, songwriter, producer, radio announcer, and actor, Carl B. Phillips. Join Carl as he talks with gospel recording artists, producers, songwriters, pastors, and other creatives about music, ministry, and life. Get ready for another great conversation on the Carl B. Phillips Show.
This week's guest on the Carl B. Phillips Show, legendary gospel recording artist and award-winning songwriter, Pastor Rudolph Stanfield. I want to talk family a little bit with you. So I've read this in your bio. You are the father of 9 children, 7 daughters, 2 sons. How have you balanced being the father of so many children?
Oh man, it was a rough situation initially. It was 8 daughters and 1 son, and my oldest daughter passed in the year of 2022.
Hmm.
Her name was Aretha Stanfield. She was a dialysis patient. She's 44 years old. Had multiple surgeries throughout her life and battled illness and sickness. And she made her transition. So that left initially the my other daughters, twin daughters, Tracy Singleton, Stacey Harris, another daughter, Selena Harrison, another daughter, Cynthia Stanfield. Byron is in the middle, Byron Darnell Stanfield Sr. My other daughter, which would be Erica Woodard, then Jabrina Smith, and then the baby girl would be Ravana Stanfield. And then I recently married, about going on now 2 years, and I inherited a son-in-law, and his name is James Brown. So it's the 2 sons and the rest of the girls. And I have grandchildren, 14 grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren. And God is just faithful to my family. It's been a challenging task. Of course it is. Transparency. All of my children I raised in the home with me. But I done my best to love on them and to be proud of them and to really put them before God in what they do, and know that they all would be the individual persons. There are no perfect situations in life,
Right.
No perfect people. You love on the people that God gives you. Do what you can. I've learned in family relationships where they say blood is thicker than water. I don't know if that's from biological chemistry situation or if that's just a spiritual metaphor. But I've learned that God will put people in your life, and things will happen, and sometimes even biologically, your purpose, whether we know it or not. And some children were born in marriage, some children were born out of marriage, but there was a purpose for those who were allowed to make it and to be here. And we could see that by one of our former presidents, President Obama. that life will throw you some curves.
Right.
The old people say sometimes you end up with lemons instead of strawberries, but you take the lemons and you make lemonade,
Right.
you know. And then sometimes you just have what you have. But I'm thankful that God has allowed me, if for no more than to have been an instrument in bringing uh, those lives into existence, because now some of them have their own families,
Mm.
and you can look at that and say there's a purpose, because we don't know who it is who have may come up with the cure for cancer,
Right.
even if it's not already in existence, and perhaps I don't know if the government is watching. They keep things from the market for financial reasons and products and what have you, and you know various different things. It's a big business, the drug business, but I believe that there are cures even for diabetes and various different things that's out here that people are still being treated for, because there's money in insulin and money in treatments and various different things. But who can tell the person that was born how they got here, and they became the individual that ended up coming up with artificial kidneys
Mm.
and doing a first heart transplant on record, you know,
Right.
to be able to extend life. And as much as I believe God for healing and that there's nothing impossible or nothing, let me say it, too hard for God to
Right.
do, I also believe that's the same God that gave wisdom to those individuals to have the knowledge to be able to extend life through physical means.
Again, talking about family. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to interview your son, Byron. We talked about carrying on your legacy. He stated that he never really thought about the humongous shadow that you cast being who you are. It hit me as I got older. How
Wow.
important to you was it for Byron to see you as a dad and not as a well-known musician?
Ah, that was really important. Uh, Byron stayed with his mom, and I remember uh, I was living in Flint, Michigan at the time,
Mhm.
and I always made it a point that I was try to get and be with my son, not just on birthdays, but Christmas, and get back down to see him, and just do things that a dad would do. I think on his fifth birthday, I remember us sitting in freezing temperature in April. His birthday was in April, April 5th to be exact. And it was opening day at Tiger Stadium on Michigan and Trumbull.
Mm.
And I was so excited because we sat together under a blanket behind home plate and that big net that stops the balls from coming back. But it was positioned at Michigan and Trumbull at the stadium where it would kiss the wind from Belle Isle and from the waters. So it was just so cold. And I looked at him and I said, "You okay?" He said, "Mm-hmm." So we would eat hot dogs, and I just, wanted my son to know that this is dad that loves you. You know, um, I remember standing on the car, the hood of the car, installing his basketball rim at his house uh, to teach him how to play basketball. And when he was a little boy, I went through some crazy times of being young, um, being out on my own for the first time, learning how to pay bills, learning that when you don't pay bills, things happen. Like, creditors come, will garnish you your check and different things like that. And I had that situation a particular Christmas, and I think it was his fourth or fifth Christmas. And I remember saying, I'm always making sure my kids have something for Christmas. And that particular time, I wasn't working, or I was working, but my check was being garnished.
Mm-hmm.
And all I could see was my kid's face, and how dad never came up with excuses for making sure he could be there and do something and what have you. And then I some of the girls, their moms said, well, you always come through for them or whatever. I got this, and I'm just gonna say, this is from you, and you know we won't worry about it this year. And I know my son was accustomed to seeing me either Christmas Eve or that day,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So all I can think about is he's a kid, and you know, this personally for me, it was just the fact that I was in a position I wasn't able to do anything for them. So I knew he liked playing on drums, different because as a little boy, um, his mom would get him drums, his grandmother would get him drums, his uh, great aunt, who was Mother Charles Etta Waddles, that was his grandmother's sister.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, she would encourage Byron just as a little kid. And so that particular year, I didn't have anything. I had a Wurlitzer piano in my home in Flint. That was my only keyboard at that time. I'm dating myself, Wurlitzer. It's almost like Fender Rose.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I took the legs off, put it in the back of my car, drove all the way to Detroit, and set it up so he would look at me bringing something as, a little boy. And I brought the piano, and the first thing I showed him, he was like 4.5. He's about, he had turned 5 at that point, was, I think it was Jingle Bells. But that was the, da 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 da. But then my brain, being what it was, I didn't process necessarily. Okay, he's still a kid, at this point. The first actual song that I showed him with chords at 5, believe it or not, was Perfect Peace.
Wow.
How about afterwards, he didn't really go near a keyboard again until maybe 10 or 12 years later because he wanted to play drums. Around the time he was about 14 or 15 or something, it was like a switch went off in his head. And he just started playing like nobody's business, keyboard. All of a sudden, he became interested in keyboards,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And so for him to see me as a dad, I've always, wanted him to have that. And I wanted that for all of my children
Mm-hmm.
to have me as dad and not just some figure of an individual that you're hearing about, in the streets or in a music community or what have you. I made a conscious decision, and this is just being really transparent. I made a conscious decision that the last child that I had, that because she was able to be raised in a home with me, I made a conscious decision to literally to come off the road and try to be home more. So she wouldn't experience what her siblings experienced. That was that was probably one of my greatest uh, regrets, was not having uh, all of my children at home with me.
Right.
You know, in periods of times of ministry, what have you. It didn't stop what it was I was to do, not trying to become famous, but to express what God had birthed in me musically, to be able to share not just the chords, but the experiences that I was experiencing in music. My purpose for forming New Revelation was to put together a group of singers or people who could sing what I heard, sing what things the way I played keyboards, or experience ideas that I had musically. And I'm thankful because when I met and joined up with Thomas Whitfield, I was 17. He was 23. And of course, he met me through Reverend James Marks and the Voices of Heaven. And so we became a team. Interesting enough, when I talked about Reverend Craig and Herbert Picard and Alpha Bold, and these individuals were music mentors, and especially Herbert Picard, Minister Thomas Whitfield, that he had interaction with. As a matter of fact, the first time I met Herbert Picard, Thomas Whitfield introduced me to him at a gospel fest downtown. And I remember a photo of them with Minister Thomas Whitfield, Herbert Picard, and Deborah Smith Pollard, Dr. Pollard, that they took at one of the gospel fests. And that's where I met Herbert Picard for the first time in person. And I realized that I guess God's timeline and his timing, the people that mentored me from afar that I listened to, would prepare me for a relation with someone that some of them had mentored in person years later, which gave Thomas and I an incredible chemistry. And it just seems like we were always, when we would sit down, like we always rehearsed together or been together. But it was the mentors that literally prepared us for our relationship together musically. At that time, our first project that the company sung on was Ruth Busby.
Well, he loves me. I love that
Yeah,
song.
he loves me. Well, if you ask me if I need him, does the river need the water to
To
get
get
along?
along. To
Yeah.
this day, my church still sings that song.
Wow. I remember doing that on with Thomas at United Sound Studio, and we were there doing that. And then the very first project that we did on Sound of Gospel, as a matter of fact, I have a distinct pleasure that no one else had. I was with Thomas when he signed his first record deal. When
So
I remember Lady
I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Because you all in my questions, but I got to get something in here.
I'm
So
sorry.
you made me go pull out the Thomas Whitfield albums, And first album, Things That We Believe, Volume 1, you wrote He'll Stand By Your Side. And Volume 2, you wrote Things That We Believe. Talk
Yes.
about writing for the company in its infancy. And when we all were just starting out together, like the first
Yeah.
recording as a company.
Yeah, it was. Uh, as a matter of fact, I think that He'll Stand by Your Side may be on the brand new project. It may be on that,
Okay.
which was recorded at Sound Suite Studios, which is on Puritan Avenue. That was a studio project.
Okay.
Um, but Things That We Believe, I had this song in my head that, you know, I remember going to Thomas's home and he had an apartment on Greenview off of Chicago. And you go there, he had a spinning piano in his apartment. We go there, he would go over material and I'd go and we sit and listen and, and I said, okay, give me this chord, show me this chord or whatever. And he would say things like, you already got it. Just listen. You just listen. I'm like, okay. Okay. I said, but if I can just see your hands do it. So we would go back and forth like that. And then I said, well, I got the song. I said, I'm thinking about this or whatever. And this is what I did. In the song, there's a line that goes, this world has nothing to offer me, but I have found someone to set me free. I said, I got an idea. I said, I want to try this. And I said, but I don't know if it's gonna work. He said, oh, no, try it. Anybody who really know Thomas, they knew that he was the person that would encourage you to just do your own thing or come into your own, especially if he saw potential in you. He said, well, just go ahead and try it. I said, okay, well, I don't know. He said, go ahead on and try it. So we were in rehearsal and we were at this church off of, I want to say it was off Elmhurst. And it was a church we were rehearsing at and happened to be the church at the time where dear friends, Julius Jefferson was a part of, along with his wife and Diane, and uh, we were rehearsing there. And I remember teaching them the song uh, "Things That We Believe." And there's a part in there, like I said, the words "This world has nothing to offer, but I have found someone to set me free." Well, on the word "set," what I heard was us starting on one note, pulling the note from that one spot up into the air and coming out in harmony. So it goes, set me free. When we get to the top note, we're in harmony. So that was my little, what I heard vocally, in the song that I, had wrote. And because I didn't have a lot of verses to it, uh, there was a musical interlude in there
Hmm.
where Tommy starts singing and he almost does like this Benson thing with keyboards and guitar and his vocals. And then we do Set Me Free. Interesting enough, I would go back to that same technique of starting on one note, pulling it up into the air and ended up in harmony when I had the opportunity to work on the demo tape at 19 for Vanessa Bell Armstrong.
Wow.
And I remember saying, okay, I keep hearing you doing something, doing this. Can you do this? I said, start on this note here. I said, pull it up and hold it when you get to the top and come off of it in some type of a run. And she looked at me like I was crazy, like, are you expect me to? But interesting enough, That is one of her signatures in her singing.
I can hear it.
You can hear it. Okay, I'm not making this up. Go back and look at the records. Some people say, "Oh, I don't believe it." There are receipts, but
Let, let's
ever
do.
since Tommy gave me the opportunity to kind of just try things and be me. 5 years later, after the existence of the company, uh, he just encouraged me. You do your thing, get your own, and that's how New Revelations came into existence. I had more ideas. So, but the company, I was part of the family and the initial core of musicians during our being established.
Hmm.
Uh, but I had the opportunity to do my own thing later in forming my own singers in my own group.
Before we move on, I'm going to do another random question. Uh-oh. This is an easy one. What is your favorite movie soundtrack?
My favorite movie soundtrack. Oh man, I have so many. I love soundtrack wise. And that's kind of challenging because I love orchestration,
Mhm.
and a lot of times if I'm at the piano and I'm playing, I'm able to do uh, two different techniques from playing the organ, playing the piano. Um, One of my favorite soundtracks is that of The Wiz.
Okay.
And that's because I always enjoyed and loved Quincy Jones as an arranger, as a composer. Uh, so that would be one of my favorite
I
soundtracks.
would definitely agree. I had a chance to see The Wiz last week while the play was in town, and it
Yeah,
just brought back so many memories of the movie. Um, and what, like you said, what Quincy did with that movie was just fabulous.
yeah, yeah.
So,
But I mean, I love. I studied. I love soundtracks also to the Ten Commandments.
okay.
Um, I had the opportunity to meet and work with John Williams through Miss Franklin, Aretha Franklin, and the soundtracks for Star Wars is another one of my favorites.
I never would have thought that you would be like a Star Wars person. Is that you just like the soundtrack, or do you like going to see all the Star Wars movies?
Well, I've seen basically a lot of them, most of um, almost all of them, but the soundtracks have always been a major thing for me. Yeah.
Learn something new. Who knew that you love Star Wars? All right, let's talk a little bit more about music. You talked about New Revelation. What are some of your fondest memories of working with New Revelations?
Oh man, fondest memories. I'm going to give you one.
Okay.
I'm just going to give you one. It was so interesting. We were scheduled to have rehearsals, and because of their work schedules or what have you, it's so interesting. we would rehearse, and sometimes our rehearsals would start at 8, maybe 9, sometimes 10. We wouldn't get out maybe until 11, 12. The latest may have been 1 a.m. in rehearsals. But one time we were scheduled to have rehearsal. We had some major coming up. And one of our singers was from a church called Alpha and Omega, was at that time was Sherry Watson. She's now Robertson. Dear friend of mine's, and Brother Charles Curry, Lasante Curry, and they were part of, and the group. Also, at one time, a young lady named Diana Bent, and she later became Diana Cuts. And with that being said, we were having rehearsal and scheduled rehearsal, and so we were going to rehearse this Thursday evening, and we got to the church, got in the church, preparing to have rehearsal, and Lord and behold, there was a body in the church because they were preparing to have a homeborn the next day. And I can't remember if it was Sherry or if it was Charles. And I'm looking at the group members like, okay, y'all, we getting ready to go. And one of them said, oh, she loves singing. She don't mind. We can go ahead on and rehearse. And we actually rehearsed with the body in the church that night. Literally, this went on, and of course we didn't stay around and linger after rehearsal that night. We got out of there. But that is one of my fondest memories. We had some incredible times traveling across the country. One of my fondest tours that we had was when we went and we were on tour with the Pace Sisters and Reverend Milton Brunson and the Thompson Community Singers.
That's a major ticket.
And that was the ticket. Yeah.
You also talked earlier about showing your son Perfect Peace. The song was the title of Keith Pringle's solo album. What's the story behind writing the song?
I had just, my mom passed May the 16th, 1981.
Mm.
I moved to Flint, Michigan, August 16th, 1981, being out on my own for the first time at the age of 21.
Mm.
That was an adjustment for me because 3 years prior to that, I had planned on leaving home at 19. Of course, my mom talked me out of it, and she didn't want to release me. She let me go play for other churches, but she didn't want to release me to be out on my own. And then when she made her transition, the last 3 years, I think she was preparing me for ministry in a different way because she was 41, 42 when she passed, had a lot of illnesses going on. And she would make me come in the house, and my father would be at work, and she said, Junior, come pray for me. And she tell me to get the oil sitting on her desk, the blessed oil, lay hands on her and pray for her.
Mm.
And that began a different type of prayer ministry for me at 18, 17, 18, 19, 20. And then when she made her transition, that was kind of difficult for me.
Right.
So I was living in Flint. I ended up in a situation, somehow I was getting ready to go through some type of a legal battle for something. Um, I hadn't broke the law. Let me say it like that, but something was happening, and I had never been in court, never needed a lawyer, didn't know how the outcome was going to be
Mm.
with the situation, and I was troubled. At some point or another, I recognized my mom had made her transition. I was still dealing with grief,
Right.
in a very real way. And with that being said, I remember being in Bible study. The church I was a member at that time was Harris Memorial Church of God in Christ. Elder Walter Emil Bogan Sr. was the pastor. And of course, we had service church on Tuesdays. We had choir rehearsal on Wednesdays. Uh, we had church again on Fridays. Then we had church, of course, Sunday morning and Sunday night religiously.
Mm.
But Friday night and Tuesday night were literally Bible study nights. So as I was hearing the word and seeds were being deposited into me, uh, dealing with a legal issue that was going to be coming up, and then just processing. My mom was gone. I'm on my own. I had never faced this situation before. Had never been in this position before. Uh, I remember being on my knees praying. I remember being in a situation where I just couldn't think because I didn't know what was happening next,
Right.
And I started hearing the literal scriptures leap from the page, that I had heard in Bible study, that will keep him in perfect peace. His mind is stayed on thee because he trusteth in thee. I will keep him in perfect peace, which is the whole passage. And I just started hearing a tune.
Mm.
Da, 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 da. That's all I had. Da, 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 da. And that was the perfect peace stayed on thee.
Mm.
I kept hearing that. And then later on, sitting in the floor, you know, um, I didn't have a whole lot of furniture. I had a TV, a couch, a dinette set, a bedroom set, and that was it. I was sitting on the floor, one of those 25-inch televisions that I got from Rental Center. And I'm sitting there and, I'm looking at my Bible and then I'm hearing this. And then pretty soon after reading that, I started to get a little comfort. My spirit started to calm.
Mm.
I started to be a little more comfortable, where wasn't going to lose any more sleep.
Wow.
And then as I was reading that, I started talking to myself in the middle of the floor. And this was a line that became a line in the middle of the song. I started saying, so what am I worrying about? So why should I be bound when God has set me free?
Yes, sir.
Why should I be bound when Jesus died for you and me? And I say, He has lifted all of my burdens, lifted them all away. He's the keeper of my soul. And it was later as I put on, God will make a way out of that way. I came out victorious in my court situation. And I didn't feel like my world was crashing in on me because my mom was gone. And it seemed like 3 or 4 different things hit me at the same time to crush me.
Mm.
And that initially stayed with me. And then being in the Word back then, the verse that he gave me, um, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that there dwell therein. And that's when came in to the next part where it really came in after that. So why should I be bound? God is, and I realized that I'm in the world. If the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof,
Mm.
the world and they that, and I said, I'm dwelling in your world, God.
Wow.
I'm looking for you to keep me. And later on, I felt and began to understand over the years as I got older that with him being the keeper of your soul, he's the keeper of he gives you peace. He keeps the spiritual consciousness of
Mm.
man, which is, you know, things that other people lost their mind over, things that other people have taken their lives over. God has allowed us to live with and live through. He has kept us in a place that allows us to put one foot in front of the other. And even when we don't have the strength to move, he gives us a consolation and knowing that we can stand still and yet see the salvation of the Lord.
A year or so ago, during the funeral for Kevin Lemons, you and the choir did Perfect Peace. And it was awesome. The experience of watching it was kind of mind blowing. When you think that Perfect Peace is over 40 years old,
Yes.
did you ever think that the song would have the type of impact that it's having 40 years later?
I never did. I remember Bishop Marvin Winans came to Flint. Interesting enough, the first time that song was I had initially started teaching it to my group, New Revelations,
Mm.
but then I taught it to my church choir for our church concert. Ironically, at that concert was Vanessa Bell Armstrong, Pastor Marvin Winans at that time. He wasn't a bishop. And Keith Pringle, which is where Keith heard the song for the first
Wow.
time. Okay. Mind you, this is 1982, February. Uh, going into 83. But prior to that, Pastor Winans and I were in Elder Bogan's office and we were just talking about some things. And he said, Rudy, he said, man, he said, the songs that God gives us and that he puts into our spirit, he said, when it comes from him, he said, they'll never grow old.
Wow.
He said, they won't get old. He said, they will get better. He said, but they won't grow old. I remember him and I having that conversation about some songs he had written, and there was some other pieces I had written. And we were just having that conversation. But that night of that concert, we sung that song. And initially, after the Feel Like Going On project, um, they were preparing for Keith's next project. Uh, Thomas had done Vanessa Bell's Piece of Steel project. And then the next project that would follow that he do for her would be Nobody But Jesus. The success from that also, um, Benson, later known as Verity Records, um, Keith being under contract with them after being released initially from his Malaco days, would do a project, and they were finished with the project that Thomas was doing for him,
Mm.
or at least we thought it was finished. And Keith says, I have one more song I want to do. And Thomas says, okay, what is it? He says, a song called uh, He's the Keeper of My Soul, because that was the initial title.
Mm.
Um, and Thomas said, okay, well, I don't really know it. And so Keith says, Rudy knows it. Rudy wrote it. So I get a call from Thomas, and I'm in Flint. And he said, hey, Keith has the song he wants to do, and it's this and what have you. He says, I don't know it. He says, well, you wrote the song, you know, he says, you know it. And, you know, he's trying to sing it to me. And so I had a cassette tape of it, of the vocals from New Reb's rehearsal and from Harris Temple's concert. And he said, well, why don't you come down to the studio? I came down to, how about Pack 3 studio? I'm naming some studios. This is on Greenfield Road in Dearborn, or Dearborn Heights. I think it was Dearborn on Greenfield.
Mm.
Uh, and I came down to Pack 3, and it was myself. I can't remember if it was Myron Bell on the drums. I know Kern Leonard Brantlin was on the bass. And I came down and laid the music tracks for the song.
Mm.
Um, and then initially, that project was supposed to be, because it's on, uh, the song is on the project with some incredible songs.
Right.
Initially, the project was going to be With My Whole Heart. It was after they recorded Perfect Peace. The executive producer, Butch McGee, changed and said they were going to title it Perfect Peace,
Wow.
as opposed to Keeper of My Soul. He said the title was too long. So Bush changed the title, and they made that the title of the project. And that's how that happened. So kudos to my friend and brother, who also was a musician at Prayer Tabernacle Church before Thomas got there, Minister Keith Brinkham, for remembering. And I say it was just in the plan of God for that time.
Man, such a great song.
And when we got to Kevin Lemon's funeral, I never realized that I was on program
Mm.
until I got to the actual service. And I saw my name in the program. And they had me scheduled behind J.J. Harrison to speak. And they had different segments in the program. And they came to a place in the program that says representing the industry of gospel music. And of course, Bishop Walker was there, just some who's who of everybody that was there. And I was sitting, I remember my wife, Evangelist Jackie J. Stanfield, was sitting next to me, and LaQuinn Weaver from Detroit was sitting on the other side, and my dear friend, Reverend Keith Brooks, Pastor Keith Brooks, I call him Bishop Keith Brooks, from Atlanta, Georgia,
Mm.
was sitting on one side of me, and I'm sitting there, and my mouth is moving. And so my wife looks at me, Jackie looks at me, she said, babe, what's wrong? What's wrong? What's going on? I said, oh, nothing. I said, I'm just praying. And she said, what happened? What's going on? I said, I have no idea what I'm going to say. I said, I didn't realize I was on program.
Mm.
So I said, well, Lord, you have to word my mouth. Let me be an encouragement to this family. And when I got up, it wasn't until I got up on the stage that I realized that was 1 year from the day that I stood up at my daughter's funeral
Mm.
and had words over her, who was also 44 years old.
Wow.
And I had to gather myself, and when I opened my mouth, the Lord gave me what to say. I had no intentions of doing anything musically, but for some reason I could hear that in my head as I was speaking to his wife, Lady Tiana, and higher calling and just the people there. And I could hear, and I said, there's this little part in the song, and it's one of my favorite lines. I said that I wrote because God gave me the download of the melody of perfect peace.
Mm.
I didn't write the scripture, that's the word of God. But the portion that I did write, and that's the reason it's my favorite line, one of my favorite lines that I wrote. So why should I be bound when God has set me free? And I never started it at that spot before. All of that was impromptu, but it was under leading, I believe, of the Holy Spirit. And I just said, musicians, give me F sharp. And I had the nerve with my no singing self to try to sing a line in that place with all of those incredible singers. But I remember a conversation that Thomas and I had. He said, you may not be able to sing like everybody else, but can't nobody tell your testimony like you.
Wow.
The Carl B. Phillips Show is produced by Carl B. Phillips for Prove Me Productions. For more information about Carl B. Phillips, visit carlbphillips.com. Subscribe to The Carl B. Phillips Show on YouTube or your favorite podcast outlet.